I woke up naturally that fateful Thursday morning. The sky was just beginning to brighten outside my window, and according to the clock on the nightstand, I still had 10 minutes until my alarm went off. The house was quiet and my sheets were warm and cozy. It took me a few seconds to remember the tragedy that had taken place the evening before. The fight, the shattered plate, the way Ariana glanced over her shoulder at me in fear as she drove away with Alex and Sophie. The whole day had been a nightmare, starting with the check engine light that I had noticed on my drive into work. I had arrived to find my boss perched awkwardly on the corner of my desk, looking anywhere but into my eyes. 2 minutes into our conversation, it was clear that I was being laid off. It was nothing personal, she explained. The magazine's earnings had been in free fall since January, and people just didn't read as much anymore. I wrapped up my 10-year career at the Literist magazine in a daze. When I got home, I asked my wife Ariana to watch the kids while I made dinner. I needed to focus on something repetitive, chopping vegetables, flipping tortillas, anything until I could think straight again. A few minutes later, the kids got into an argument over a ball in the backyard, with Ariana nowhere in sight. By the time that I got back inside, everything had burned. It was the last straw. I couldn't have said what I was screaming about, but at some point, I threw a plate of fried bell peppers against the wall and called my wife names that I can't bring myself to repeat. The next thing that I knew, Ariana was bustling the kids out of the door. "You're not the man that I married." Those were the last words she ever said to me. I was confident that once she found out about what had happened at work, I would never see her or the kids again. I drank what was left of a bottle of wine that I found in the fridge, and I crawled into bed before the sun had even set. The memories rose up along with the taste of sour Chardonnay in the back of my throat. I staggered downstairs, made coffee, and went outside to check the mail. Boring mechanical actions, the only thing that I had left to hang on to. Apart from the newspaper, I had received just one solitary letter. I didn't recognize the sender's address, and the thick ivory-colored envelope felt heavy in my hand. I had thought that sort of high-quality paper and skilled penmanship had disappeared right along with people who read magazines like The Literist, and yet here it was, as real as the warm mug in my hand. Before I knew what I was doing, I had sat down at the kitchen table and begun to read. "Dear Hugh," it began, "my name is Arthur Penance. I'm writing to you from the unincorporated township of Merchandise, Indiana, which you won't find on any map. My letter is in regards to your article published in the October issue of The Literist. In it, you poke fun at the plot holes often found in horror films and books. Specifically, you asked why anybody would face a serial killer, a powerful demon, or a possessed cabin in the woods, when in most cases they could simply walk away from the whole situation. As you ask in the title of your piece, why don't you just leave? I would like to help clarify the matter for you. You see, in spite of its odd name, Merchandise most absolutely qualifies as one of those dangerous, supernatural places you mentioned. During the final 3 days in November, our town holds its annual festival of weaving. You might say that it's the pinnacle of the strangeness that happens here. I would be delighted to have you as my guest for the festival, and when it concludes, learn whether or not you have revised your opinion. Sincerely, Arthur Penance." There was something else in the envelope as well. A hand-drawn map and driving directions to Arthur Penance's home in the town of Merchandise, 8 hours and 4 states away. I read through the letter 2 more times and I considered my options. On one hand, the odds that Arthur Penance was either mentally ill or pranking me were astronomically high. On the other, I was being offered a clear-cut chance to get away from my life for a little while. Never mind that my address was unlisted and any fan mail or hate mail that I received should have gone straight to the magazine's offices. Never mind that I should have started looking for a new job and a lawyer several hours ago. This letter was my way out. For a couple days, anyway. I checked the calendar. I would never make it on time for the first day of the festival, but if I left in the next few hours, I could still catch the last two. If nothing else, the long drive would at least give me time to think. By noon, I was packed and on the road. The city gave way to suburban sprawl, and after that, to farms, woods, and barren highway exits. I had never taken a cross-country road trip before, and I was stunned by just how big everything felt. The idea that my destination was an unincorporated township that couldn't be found on any map suddenly felt a lot more plausible. In this much open space, it was possible to hide just about anything. The check engine light glared up at me while I drove, but I hadn't noticed any strange smells or ominous rattling. Not yet, anyway. I didn't stop for lunch until I had crossed the Indiana state line. It was a relief to feel like just another customer buying a meal, rather than an unemployed magazine writer staring down the barrel of a messy divorce. I chatted more than usual with the customers and staff at the diner, but I wasn't surprised to learn that none of them had ever heard of a place called Merchandise. I had to be more careful after I left the highway. Arthur Penance's directions were good, but that didn't make the unlabeled country roads any easier to navigate. The check engine light, which I had barely paid attention to earlier, was a lot more troubling out here. How long had it been since I had seen a gas station, or for that matter, another car? The sun was setting when I saw it, a cheerfully painted orange and purple sign that rose out of the cornfields like a mirage. Merchandise, Indiana, it read, weaving the ties that bind since 1832. Ties that bind. Something about those words made me shudder, and they made me think of blood feuds and distant hollers, families with skeletons in the closet, and couples trapped in destructive relationships. I turned my blinker on before I made the turn, mostly just because I hoped its repetitive, reassuring click would make the whole thing feel a bit less like a bad dream. Dusk darkened the fields, distant houses, and little clumps of trees. Arthur Penance had written that his house was the third right after the sign, but the gravel driveways were easy to miss and far between. I was scrutinizing the fields for the next one when I saw a man on the side of the road. His arms were spread wide and his face was hidden behind some sort of cloth mask. With my heart racing, I slowed down to get a closer look, and then I laughed. It was a scarecrow, the most absurdly dressed one that I had ever seen. It was wrapped from head to toe in layers of bright cloth, crimson, fuchsia, acid green. At least I thought the people of Merchandise seemed to have a sense of humor. Arthur Penance's driveway was up ahead. I made the turn and rattled uphill towards a small ranch house. The golden light in its window bobbed like an anglerfish's lure, and I found myself wishing that I had told someone where I was going. Arthur had been so polite in his letter, but what if he was unhinged or even dangerous in person? A shadow moved in the window. Somebody inside got to their feet and opened the screen door. A porch lamp lit up a yard full of kitschy decorations and old farm equipment. There seemed to be an awful lot of cars scattered around, but for all I knew, only half of them were running. I parked beside a chipped garden gnome in what was left of a chicken coop. On the porch, my host lifted a hand and waved. Arthur Penance was about what I had imagined, slim, bald, and tanned from a lifetime of working outside. What I hadn't expected, however, was his attire. He wore a violently purple shirt, turquoise pants with a flower pattern, and golden felt slippers. It reminded me a lot of the scarecrow that I had seen earlier, if that was what it had been. What had it been doing by the side of the road after all? Shouldn't it have been up on a post? That word unhinged flashed back into my mind, but I had come this far, I might as well give him a chance. "You made it. I wasn't sure that you were going to come," Arthur exclaimed as I climbed out of the driver's seat, stiff from so many hours on the road. We shook hands, and I was relieved to see nothing in his expression that hinted at malice, grift, or insanity. "I see you're admiring my outfit," Arthur said, clapping me on the shoulder and gesturing towards his front door. "Would you believe that it's all handmade? Back in the 1830s, there was a terrible famine in these parts. People spun all their spare thread into cloth, and they sold it to outsiders just to survive. And we still take cloth making very seriously here in merchandise. Children learn how to sew and weave as soon as they can walk. The patterns that we wear might seem tacky to you, but they're just our little way of remembering where we come from." Once inside, I could see his point. It was a typical country homestead in every way, except for the textiles. The couch was hot pink, the curtains a bright sky blue that matched Arthur's shoes. If everything didn't clash so badly, I would have called it beautiful. A loud thump from the depths of the house made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Arthur laughed when he saw the look on my face. "Oh, you didn't think you were the only out-of-towner invited to our little festival now, did you?" Actually, I had thought so, although it made sense that Arthur would have spread out his invitations in case a few of us had turned him down. The delicious smell of chicken soup boiling in the kitchen made me forget my bruised ego. It also made my fellow guests wander hungrily out of their rooms. There was Roland, a slick film director from Nevada, and Kara, an aspiring young novelist who lived just a few hours away from merchandise. It was immediately clear what we all had in common. We had all written something critical about the supernatural or the horror genre in general. Our host was clearly well read, and between the tacky furniture, the walls were lined with bookshelves, novels, magazines, and even newspapers arranged by date. "Out here," Arthur admitted, "we have a lot of time on our hands." In the course of the meal, I learned that our host was 58, widowed, and that his two grown sons worked as soybean packers on one of the nearby farms. The three of us discussed books, movies, country life, and just about everything else except for the so-called weaving festival that Arthur had invited us all out here to experience. I got the feeling that he was holding it back somehow, reserving it like a pastry chef who saves the best dessert for last. After dinner, Arthur showed me to my own clean and simple bedroom. The sheets were tucked in and there were towels on the nightstand if I wanted a shower. Apart from the garish colors, it was the coziest place that I had stayed in years. I thanked Arthur and I got ready for bed, but not before locking the door behind me. As kind as my host had been, he was still a stranger, and I was a long way from home. I woke to birds chirping and the smell of frying bacon. Arthur had prepared an enormous country breakfast for us. "We like to live well here in merchandise." Arthur grinned at the three of us. "I hope none of you are vegetarians." As it turns out, Kara was, but she still went back for seconds of the homemade strawberry jam and fried potatoes. Roland picked at his food, complaining about how many laps he would have to run to undo just a couple forkfuls. I just sat back and listened, content with the decision that I had made to come here. I had needed to get away for a while, and what could ever go wrong in a place like this? "Well, now that you're fed," he said afterwards, "I suppose you'll be wanting to see what you all came this way for, the Festival of Weaving." Kara cheered, Roland smirked. I gave Arthur a reassuring smile, but something else was on my mind. In his letter, our host had written that merchandise was a dangerous supernatural place, but so far he had had nothing but praise for life out here. And what the hell was the catch? That uneasy thought stayed with me as I changed clothes and went to meet the others on the porch. I was halfway across the living room when I heard a shriek from outside. Roland stopped fiddling with his sunglasses and locked eyes with me. We were both wondering the same thing. Where was Kara? We rushed to the porch only to find her frantically tugging at her car door. I shouted to her asking what was wrong, but I never found out. Kara just kept gibbering, pointing over my shoulder at the empty cornfields. After dozens of tries, she finally clawed her way into her beat-up sedan, rocketed backwards across the yard, and took off down Arthur Penance's driveway as though fleeing for her life. "She ought not to have done that," Arthur said beside me, making me jump. "The fog is thick this morning. I hope my letter didn't spook her too much. It was more or less the same as yours, but novel writers, you know, they tend to have overactive imaginations." Arthur smiled at Roland and I. "You two aren't going to bail on me, are you?" Roland and I shook our heads, but Kara's breakdown had unnerved both of us more than we would have liked to admit. The young author had seen something in those misty fields, even if she had been the only one to see it. For a moment, I even wondered if Kara had just been acting. Maybe she was from merchandise too, and had just wanted to have some fun scaring a pair of gullible city slickers. And those dark thoughts stayed with me as we climbed into Arthur's pickup truck and headed into town. I checked in the rear view as we backed out of the driveway, but there was no sign of the scarecrow that I had seen the night before. The drivers of the cars that we passed all waved like they knew Arthur, and while I couldn't have said for sure, it seemed that the passengers wore the same sort of wild clothing as Arthur. There was a woman in a hot pink dress, and two old men in matching turquoise suits, and a car full of children in glittering golden smocks. It would have been cheerful if it wasn't so uncanny. Oh, it's peaceful out here in the country. No crime, no pollution, everybody knows everybody. We can't leave merchandise, but then again, why would anybody ever want to? I became aware of a large shape up ahead, some sort of huge tent, a colorful tent. There were some fair rides, a few food stands, and some midway games set up in front, but all of them were dwarfed by the freakishly large big top. All of merchandise seemed to be here, and even though I had just eaten, the smell of frying funnel cakes made my mouth water. It was a festival in every sense of the word, but why would anyone want to celebrate being trapped in some tiny, totally unknown town? As if in response, a beautiful blonde girl in a bright orange shawl locked eyes with me and then smiled. I thought of something that I had read once about orange being the color of madness, and I shuddered. The screams of the children on the fair ride suddenly sounded deranged and delirious. What the hell was I doing here? Before I could invent an excuse to get back to my car, Arthur had grabbed me by the arm and started introducing me to anyone who passed by. Roland was getting the same treatment, but he took to it naturally. He was just as eager to talk about making horror films as the townspeople were to listen. We were here, Arthur explained to everyone, to learn about merchandises, a peculiar situation. To my surprise, every one of the colorfully dressed strangers nodded along like they knew exactly what he was talking about. Either none of them were crazy or all of them were. I couldn't have said which. Kids lined up to ride ramshackle roller coasters. Adults ate fried snacks on benches and swapped gossip. Elderly farmers compared the produce and animals that they had entered in the biggest in merchandise contest. Apart from the weird attire, it could have been any small town fair the world over. Around noon, a series of deep metallic clangs broke up the festivities. It sounded like some sort of weird, low-pitched bell. Everyone stopped what they were doing and headed towards the big top. Arthur, Roland, and I went with them. The battered old bleachers and tacky tent stripes reminded me of a circus, but the similarities ended there. There was no ringmaster or lion tamer in the circle of dirt at the center of the stadium. There was nothing there but a candle and an old spinning wheel. The place was packed, but the stands were dead silent. A short man in an azure jacket and a tall red top hat walked out into the center of the circle. "That's Rich Hardesty, the mayor," Arthur whispered as the man began to speak. "Welcome, welcome, friends and neighbors. Today at the apex of our festival of weaving, we remember what ties us together and what binds us to merchandise. By making our pledge, we are safe from those who came before, and in return we promise to remain here for their nourishment. Let us renew our sacred vow." His speech finished, the man in the top hat approached the spinning wheel, held the candle flame to its razor-sharp needle, and pricked his finger with it. He smeared the resulting blood droplet on each of his cheeks, giving him the unsettling appearance of a rosy-faced puppet or a clown. He motioned to the first row of bleachers. One by one, each citizen of merchandise sterilized the spinning wheel's needle, punctured a finger with it, and then made the same 2 marks on their cheeks. I watched, mesmerized, and then I realized that our turn was coming up. Until that moment, I hadn't paid full attention to the curious looks that we had been getting, or to the whispers at my back. To the people of merchandise, we were the oddly dressed strangers. I glanced at Arthur, hoping he would offer some way to get out of this. "You can always just leave," he said instead. The smile in his face suddenly seemed malicious. "It's easy, right? If you really don't believe in any of this, the door is right behind you. My house is just a couple of miles down the road, and from there you can drive back home and never think about our little town again. No one's going to stop you. What do you say?" "Nope." Roland stood and put on his sunglasses. "Not just no, but hell no. Haven't you people ever heard of a little thing called a risk of infection? You're lucky that nobody's gotten sick. Sorry, Art, but I'm out of here." And just as Arthur had promised, nobody tried to change Roland's mind. Now everyone was staring at me, and I knew that if I left too, the townspeople of merchandise would win. They would have proven that us big city critics were all talk. Out here, we were scared of our own shadows. I forced a smile and approached the spinning wheel. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, but it was far from pretty. Several hundred years of history or maybe a fire had blackened it. Only its needle shone sharp and bright as ever. The onlookers were dead silent as I passed the candle flame across its point and raised my finger. "Wait, don't. It's not too late." Every instinct cried out at me to stop, but I was already pressing the hot metal into my skin. It hurt less than I had expected, but as I brought my finger to my cheeks to complete the rite, I was struck by an awful sense of loss, as though I had just made a choice that could never be undone. There were no cheers or applause. I simply took my place in line with the other citizens of merchandise. Once everyone had made their mark, we shuffled out into the bright sunshine, blinking and squinting. Everything that had happened in the big tent behind us felt like a dream. "And that's it." Arthur clapped me on the back. "I hope your new home is to your liking." Of course, according to Arthur's beliefs, completing the ritual meant that I could never again leave merchandise. When I got into my car and drove away tomorrow morning, poor Arthur was going to have a crisis of faith. There was no sign of Roland. I suppose he had started the long walk back as Arthur had suggested. I couldn't imagine the jittery athletic filmmaker just waiting around for a ride. Little by little, people were breaking out of the somber trance that the ritual had seemed to put them in. Children with a smear of blood on both cheeks were lining up to win giant stuffed animals or run through the corn maze. Adults were shaking hands with old friends and buying overpriced cups of hard cider. It's a normal festival, I told myself, just like I thought at the beginning. I wandered over to the concession stand and had a few of those big cups of hard cider myself. The stuff was strong and sweet. I knew that I was drinking too much too fast, but some part of me needed to blunt the memory of what had happened in that tent. Arthur just watched with a bemused smile, as though he suspected what was going on inside my head. So what if I got a little bit buzzed, I told myself. This was the closest thing that I had had to a vacation in years, and who knew if I would ever come back to merchandise. By the fourth cup, I was telling bad jokes to strangers and considering getting in line for one of those giant trampolines. Fortunately, Arthur grabbed me by the arm and half-dragged, half-carried me back to his pickup. I had forgotten how quickly the sun sets in autumn. Our shadows stretched out on the dead grass in front of us, looking monstrous and distorted. I hoped that Roland had made it back all right. I clung woozily to the door while Arthur drove, pressing my feet against the window glass like a child and scanning the roadside for any trace of the slick young filmmaker. There shouldn't have been any need to look for him. Roland should have made it back to Arthur's hours ago, but then again, maybe some part of me already suspected what I was going to find. And there was something on the gravel shoulder of the road, a shredded, inside-out thing surrounded by buzzards. The headlights passed it before I got a chance for a closer look. Arthur hadn't even slowed down. I shouted at him to stop, but my host just shook his head. "Roadkill," he shrugged. "Out here it happens all the time." The cider rolled in my stomach. I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't any deer or raccoon. Wild animals didn't wear designer shirts or black sunglasses. One more night, I told myself. Tomorrow morning I could leave this place behind for good. I stumbled into the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I was a corpse pale and a cold sweat had broken out on my forehead. Before collapsing into bed, I peered out the window at the twilight cornfields. The stalks seemed to be moving on their own, rustling and squirming together like living things. I swallowed down the vomit in my throat, pressed my face into the pillow and tried to sleep. It was another beautiful morning in merchandise. Arthur prepared another hearty meal for me, and just like on that first night, we didn't talk about the strangeness. I avoided discussing Kara's strange behavior, or what I thought I had seen on the side of the road, and he didn't comment on what he thought would happen to me when I tried to leave town. Still, there was something strange about the twinkle in his eye as he said his goodbyes, almost like he knew I'd be back. The sun was burning the fog off the cornfields by the time that I shook Arthur's hand and backed down his bumpy gravel driveway for what I hoped would be the last time. I planned to send Arthur cards for Christmas and his birthday, but I was never coming back to this weird town for as long as I lived. I was passing that bright orange and purple sign, the one that read Merchandise Indiana, weaving the ties that bind since 1832. When I felt a biting pain in my left cheek. At first I thought that I had been stung by an insect, and then I realized that it got worse the further that I went beyond the town border. I halted in the middle of the empty road to test an awful theory. Sure enough, the pain grew less when I reversed, staying the same while I was parked, and increased if I tried to continue forward. Whatever this was, I couldn't let it control me, and I especially couldn't let it keep me here. I shut my eyes tight and I stepped on the gas. The agony was unbearable. Hot blood mixed with the tears streaming down my face almost reluctantly. I braked, switched off the engine and looked into the rearview mirror. From the corner of my lip to the base of my eye, the left side of my face was as red and raw as a fresh cut of meat. A flesh-colored string, my skin, I realized, stretched away from the wound, toward merchandise. I took my foot off the brake. As the car rolled forward, I watched the flesh peel off my cheek like thread unraveling from a spool. Even if it were possible to power through the pain and keep going, I would die of blood loss before I even reached civilization. My only choice, it seemed, was to return to merchandise. I turned the key in the ignition and nothing happened. My second and third tries were just as unsuccessful, and slowly I came to understand that I had broken down out here on a 2-lane road in the middle of nowhere. The way back to merchandise was clear, but I hadn't seen a single car all day, which meant that I would be walking it. I thought about Roland's fate and I shuddered. What if whatever had got to him found me as well? What if it could smell the blood that, even now, was dribbling onto my shirt? I pressed an old cloth against my cheek to stop the bleeding. I let my car roll onto the shoulder and then I stepped out onto the deserted road. Those endless fields of rustling corn gave me the same sense of vertigo as they had when I had first come out here. The flat landscape made it difficult to gauge distances. Merchandise could have been 15 minutes away or 50. The corn rustled in the breeze. The crunch of my footsteps on the asphalt sounded horribly loud, and before long, even the birds had gone silent. The sensation of being watched made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. There was no one in sight, yet I was convinced that I wasn't alone. I pressed the rag tighter against the raw pain in my cheek and I trudged on. Whatever was happening here, maybe I could just walk through it. Maybe before I knew it, a car would go speeding past, a dog would bark, and the world would be back to how it should be. I wasn't sure when I first noticed that some of the corn stalks were moving in the wrong direction against the wind. I wanted to run, but at the same time I knew that it would be useless. Whatever was out there, there were several of them, and they were coming towards me from all directions. I backed into the middle of the road and I lifted my hands, although whether it was to fight or surrender I wasn't sure. 6 shadowy figures stopped at the border of the cornfields, just deep enough in the stalks to keep me from seeing them clearly. They seemed almost like regular people, except they were a bit smaller, a bit more shriveled. A smell came with them, a salty, oily odor like dried meat gone sour. Even so, I could still convince myself that they were just locals who had come to have a laugh at my expense. Right up until one of them began to snarl. At least that's what I thought the sound was at first. Only later did I realize that it was more like sniffing. I looked left and right, hoping and praying for someone to appear. But of course, no one did. The 6 of them emerged from the shadowy corn stalks. They were wrapped from head to toe in colorful cloth, just like the thing that I had seen on my drive into merchandise. The thing that I had thought was a scarecrow. Even though their faces were shrouded, they still somehow seemed to know my exact position. That growling or snuffling, or whatever it was, grew louder as they closed in. I tried to run, strong hands that seemed more like claws held me in place. Up close, I could see that the skin beneath their cheerfully colored wrappings was gray and withered, like old charcoal. While I kicked and struggled, one of them raised my hand to its mouth, like it was about to eat me alive. I screamed and shoved myself backward with all the adrenaline that I had, but it was useless. Those things had a kind of unholy strength that no amount of muscle could break through. A black, pit-like mouth opened anaconda-wide between those strips of cheerful cloth. A grayish-white tongue wormed its way out between those yellowed and gumless teeth. It licked the finger that I had pressed against the needle during the festival of weaving. I cringed at its cold, spongy touch. Those who came before. That was what the mayor of merchandise had said during the weaving ritual. Giving blood to the spinning wheel was supposed to protect the people of merchandise from those who came before. I was looking at the embalmed, embroidered dead of merchandise. The growling, sniffing noise stopped. Those bony, mummified hands released me, and those who came before backed away, disappearing into the fields. I climbed to my feet, my heart racing. I had passed their test. Roland, I realized, hadn't. By the time that I made it back to Arthur Penance's driveway, my feet were blistered and aching, but at least the wound on my face had gone numb. Arthur was sitting on his porch reading a book. He didn't look surprised to see me. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or try to strangle him with my bare hands. "I don't see why you're so upset," Arthur muttered, scratching his chin. "I told you what would happen every step of the way. All you had to do was listen, but you didn't, did you? You were so convinced that what you had written was true, that you knew the difference between possible and impossible. Well, what do you think now?" A rusty shovel lay beside Arthur's flower beds. I grabbed it and lifted it over my head, demanding that he give me one good reason why I shouldn't bash his brains out with it. Arthur just laughed. "Oh, if you did, I'd be back on my feet with the moonrise. Then all of our friends and neighbors would make me a beautiful tapestry to wrap myself in until the end of days. Although," Arthur chuckled, "I don't recommend it. Those who came before don't take kindly to anyone who disturbs the tranquility of merchandise. It is seen as a breach of the deal, you see." Arthur went on before I could ask what he meant. "There was this widow a few years back, Jenny Branks, who got religious after her husband had died. Went around telling everyone that the festival of weaving was an abomination against God, and that our bonds with merchandise were a punishment for our sinful ways. A few people started listening to her too. One night, they all got together and tried to burn down the barn where the spinning wheel was kept. Those who came before didn't take kindly to that at all. They dragged her and her little band of arsonists to one of the abandoned silos on the edge of town. I don't know what they did to them in there, but the screaming had started at dawn and it didn't die down until dusk. And you know what? When they came out again, every one of them had joined those who came before, just as if they had never believed any of that outsider hogwash. I would imagine," Arthur added pointedly, "that the same thing would happen to you." I dropped the shovel and I clutched my head in my hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" I moaned. Arthur squeezed my shoulder. "There's plenty of work to be had in merchandise. It's hard work, farm work, but it looks like a bit of time outside might do you some good. Tomorrow we'll find you a place to stay. You're one of us now, and we look out for each other. It's not a bad life. And in the meantime," Arthur perked up, pointing to the kitchen table inside, "you can help me with my letters. Letters. We're always in need of new blood here in merchandise. It's a win-win, you see. Those who complete the ritual of weaving stay and increase the population. And as for those who don't," Arthur hesitated, "well, those who came before are eternally hungry. Starvation can't kill them, of course, but I suppose from time to time, it's nice to feast on something other than a few drops of blood on a single day of the year. After you die and rise again yourself, you'll probably feel the same way. What else could I do? I was sure that the people from my old life would come searching for me, but I doubted that they would look very hard. I had brought Arthur's letter with me, leaving no proof of where I had gone, and as my host had said, merchandise didn't appear on any map. As I walked to the cozy kitchen table, I wondered how many other towns like this were out there, towns that had been left purposefully unplotted for their own sinister reasons. I sat down with a stack of paper, envelopes, and leads that Arthur had found in articles about the supernatural. It was time to start writing to my new neighbors. Today's episode is sponsored by PDS Debt. A fresh start, same threat. Debt is a silent killer and it doesn't make noise, it just multiplies. Interest compounds, fees stack up, and before long it's choking the life out of your finances. But the case isn't closed. PDS Debt has already helped hundreds of thousands escape, reduce what they owe, and take back control. Your way out starts now. Whether you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, PDS Debt has custom options to help you get out of debt. They go beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and craft a personalized plan designed just for you. There's no minimum credit score required. They're here to help you save more, pay off your debt faster, and start putting money back where it belongs, in your pocket. PDS Debt is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. It boasts thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and holds a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. Why? Because PDS Debt has helped hundreds of thousands of people get out of debt. Every month that you wait only costs you more in interest and fees. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best is right now. If I had needed this product, it's what I would use. Don't wait for debt to strike again. Break free in 30 seconds. Get your free personalized assessment and the best option for you at pdsdebt.com/MrGreaves. That's pdsdebt.com/MrGreaves. pdsdebt.com/MrGreaves.